Well, good afternoon, and oh, thank you. And may I say what a pleasure and a privilege it is to be performing for you here in this wonderful building today. Thank you to each and every one of you for coming. I'm aware at lunchtime concerts it's traditional for the performer to come out, play something, and then talk to the audience. But I'm breaking tradition today for a very good reason. While some of you are likely flamenco aficionados, for others, this may be your first time experiencing flamenco. And as such, it occurred to me that maybe knowing a little bit about it might be helpful. Whenever I say to people that I'm a flamenco guitarist, there's always one comment that I often hear. It goes something like this. I love flamenco. I particularly love that composition by Rodrigo. You know, the one with the orchestra. Now here's the thing. That might sound flamenco-ish, but it's not flamenco. That's a classical composition by a Spanish composer for the guitar. So this raises the question, what is flamenco? How is it different to classical guitar, for instance? It's quite simple, really. If I had to boil it down to one thing, it would be this. The job of a classical guitarist is to interpret a composition. In other words, the notes they are playing are set in advance. By contrast, a flamenco guitarist, their job is to improvise based on rhythm. In other words, when a flamenco performer says, this is a Soleá, or this is a Bulería, that's not the name of a composition. It's the name of a rhythmic structure with very specific subject themes that act as a framework for spontaneous creativity. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, what you're about to hear, in many cases, will be as new to me as it is to you. The doors have been locked. Another comment I often hear is this. What do you mean you're performing solo? What about the dancer? Well, to a certain extent, this comment has an element of truth to it. Yes, the traditional flamenco ensemble has the guitar, the cante, the singing, and the baile, the dance. But due to dramatic innovations over the past 100 years, solo guitar performances have evolved to become an equally compelling artistic showcase. And that's why today I'm sat on the stage solo. This being said, although the singer and dancer are not physically on the stage with me, they're very much here in spirit. In terms of what I'm doing with the right hand, the rasgueados and the rhythmic strumming patterns, you evoke the footwork of the dancer. And similarly, with the left hand, with the falsettas, the melodic material you're playing, you're evoking the arabesque beauty of the singer's voice. You see what I mean? They might not be here with me, but they are in spirit. This leads me to the first piece on today's program. I'm going to play for you one of the most important flamenco forms. It's called Soleá. Soleá, it's basically a flamenco lament. If the singer were here, the subjects they will be singing about are great loss, tragedy, suffering. In this sense, Soleá is kind of like the Spanish version of the blues. And even when performing solo, it's these emotions that one is meant to evoke when performing Soleá. The Soleá de Córdoba. very much. From the profound beauty and lamentation of the Soleá, we're going to go to a flamenco form which beautifully evokes the dancer. I speak, of course, of the Bulería, one of the most fiery, fast, and exciting of all the flamenco forms. Many people assume they've never heard a Bulería before, but I can assure you, you probably have. If you've ever seen the film West Side Story, the famous song, da 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 dum, that's the rhythm of the Bulería. So they took that rhythm and used it in that particular film. So you have heard this before, even though it's a more popular culture version of it. The Bulería, it's one of the more complex flamenco rhythms, so much so that if you're in Spain and people want to see how well you play, they tend to say, play for me a Bulería. This particular Bulería, I'd like to dedicate to one of the great dancers of flamenco, who in the 1950s set the world on fire with her footwork. I'm of course talking of Carmen Amaya. So I'm going to call this particular one the Bulería de Carmen. There's an old joke in the guitar world that guitar concerts, it's 60% playing, 40% tuning. But in that respect, I'm very grateful I chose to play the guitar for a living and not the harp. For this next piece of music, we need to talk a little bit about the history of Spain. Many people think of flamenco as purely a product of southern Spain, but it's a little bit more nuanced than that. Southern Spain is one of the most diverse culturally places in Europe, and this is due in no small part to the many different peoples who've passed through and settled there over millennia. Were you to go to the southern Iberian Peninsula 3,000 years ago, Jewish communities were settling there. In the Bronze Age, Greek traders set up ports along the coast. In the time of Carthagena and Hannibal, the Carthaginians ruled Spain. After the fall of Carthage, Rome took over. It's where we get the word Spain from. It comes from the Latin Hispania. After the fall of Rome, Germanic tribes, the Vandals and the Visigoths, passed through. And then, in 711 AD, Berber tribes from North Africa crossed the Straits of Gibraltar and established an Islamic caliphate on the shores of Europe. Now, this era of Islamic Spain, it lasted in the south for almost 800 years, 711 AD to 1492. Just put that in context for a minute. That's a lot longer than Europeans have been on the continent of North America. Imagine the huge cultural exchange that happened between East and West. And you can see this today in southern Spain. Look at the architecture. It has a distinctly Eastern flavour to it. Look at the language. Almost any Spanish word that begins al, it probably, etymologically speaking, is Arabic in origin. And of course, you hear echoes of this in the music. Buried deep within flamenco lie keys to Spain's Moorish past. And one of the best examples of this is a flamenco form called Zambra. You saw me retuning the guitar a moment ago. Well, there's a reason for that. I'll demonstrate. If you lower the lowest string of the guitar, it no longer sounds like a Western guitar. It suddenly sounds like the Arabic oud. Allow me to demonstrate for a moment. You see what I mean? It's a very different sound world. The Zambra taps into that. We tend to think, that West and East, they're ideological monoliths, citadels whose doors are firmly close to each other. But it wasn't always so. In the period of Al-Andalus, the era of Muslim Spain, there was a huge cultural exchange that happened. And you see this deep within flamenco. The Zambra is the perfect example that takes us back to that world where there was a great link between cities in the east like Damascus and great cities in western areas like Córdoba and Sevilla. The Zambra. Thank you very much. It's an amazing world that music conjures, isn't it? Incredible. As we are talking about the multicultural roots of flamenco, it seems a pity not to reference Latin American music. Due to Spain's rich history, Latin American music is a part of flamenco heritage as well. And of all of the different forms that have a Latin American root, the Cuban rumba is probably the most favoured amongst modern audiences. Some flamenco aficionados get a little bit snooty about rumba. They kind of see it as a very light form, kind of like a popular entertainment thing. But I think this does rumba a little bit of a disservice. Rumba is popular the world over, and there's a good reason for it. They tend to have good, strong melodies that you can hum. They tend to have good, strong driving rhythms that you can tap your foot to. And most importantly, towards the end, it builds in complexity and energy, and it tends to build and build and build and build and build, and then there's a big flourish, the flamenco arm goes up, which means the audience knows when to applaud. In short, rumbas are beautiful, and people should play them more. With that in mind, let's have a rumba. it's impossible not to feel better about the world after you hear a rumba. To my absolute astonishment, we've come to the final piece on the programme. And I hate to tell you this, but I tend to plan my programmes right up to the time limit, so there's not even an encore, I'm afraid. It's the last one. But before I introduce it, I'd just like to say a few things, if I may. I'd firstly like to thank each and every one of you for coming today. The simple truth is, the audience is what makes it a performance. Otherwise, it's just me sat in a room playing. So thank you to each and every one of you for coming. It's wonderful to be here. And it's also a privilege to perform in a space like this. I'd also like to say something else, because I don't think this gets said often enough at concerts. It's easy to assume events like this just happen, that performers kind of turn up and voila, you're there. But the simple truth is, these events don't happen unless people make them happen. There are wonderful teams of people up and down the country making brilliant concert series like this happen every week. And the team at St James's Piccadilly, they do an amazing job here and are a huge pillar in the UK arts community. So with that in mind, I'd like to thank their entire administrative team, their volunteers and their staff. Thank you for doing this, and thank you to our wonderful sound team as well. Can we give them a round of applause, please? So, the final piece on the programme. I'm going to do something that a lot of performers don't do in concerts. People tend to try to kind of do the kind of big firework display piece at the end. I tend not to do that. I tend to find, if you've come to a lunchtime concert particularly, it's often nicer to leave where you bring things down a little bit at the end. Also, it's a little bit difficult to top the rumba. With this in mind, I'm going to play a flamenco form to close, which is always played toque libre, which is a fancy way of saying it's very rhythmically loose. So it's quite different to many of the forms you've heard so far. There's another little thing here. If a flamenco piece has a name that sounds like a location, it's probably from there. For instance, if it's called a malagueña, it's probably from Malaga. If it's called a rondeña, it's probably from Ronda. What I'm about to play for you is a Granaína. It's from Granada. I could see some of your faces light up. Now, it's not my place to tell an audience what to think about a piece of music. That's down to your interpretation when you listen to it. But so that you can access this music a little bit better, maybe it would help if I described you what I'm thinking about when I'm performing a Granaína. This all comes down to a story of when I was in Spain a few years ago. I was staying in Granada, which is my favourite city in the world. And I was there to work with some singers. And I turn up at my hotel, check in, and I was just really excited to be in my favourite city again. Consequently, I slept terribly. I woke up at about 4 o'clock in the morning, and it wasn't that sort of awake where you roll over and fall asleep again. I was awake. And I thought, well, goodness me, what can you do? I kind of looked at my guitar in the corner and I thought, I don't think the neighbours are going to appreciate this. So I decided, you know what? I've seen the sun set many times in Granada, but I've not seen it rise. So I got dressed, went out my hotel, and went to the old part of town, the Albaicín. It's built on a hill. And I walk all the way up those wonderful cobbled streets with the whitewashed Spanish houses on either side, and there's the sound of running water all around you. And I come out at the top at a place called the Plaza de San Nicolas. That plaza has one of the most stunning views in the world. Basically, if you ever see a photograph of the Alhambra Palace from a distance, it's probably taken from that plaza. But when I got there, it was still dark. You couldn't really see anything. And I sit on the wall for about 2.5 hours. And as I'm sat there, the sky starts to change from pitch black to purple, and then a very dark blue. And as the red orb of the sun comes up on my left, you start to be able to see the city in front of you, the ancient Alhambra Palace in the foreground, and in the distance, the snow-dusted mountains of the Sierra Nevada. And as the sun rises higher and higher, the city just woke up in front of me, and you could hear the birds singing the dawn chorus at the same time as the tinkling of running water from the fountains everywhere. And it was just me in the city. It was an exceptional morning. I've never had one so beautiful before or since. And whenever I play a Granaína, that's what I'm trying to evoke. That feeling I had from seeing that beautiful city wake up in front of me. Thank you to all of you. And I will be signing and selling CDs at the back at the end, if you want to say hello or take a souvenir home with you. Thank you very much. Thank you to the concert team. And I leave you with the Granaína. Just for the record, this is not the Granaína. This is me tuning.
saw that. Oh. She's beautiful. Did you like it? Yes, I know.
Ah, I had a similar experience. Just beautiful. The Albaicín.